On September 4th, 2025, Dilphosaur, aka Karina Drawfee, posted this picture of her OC loose to blue sky. And when I saw it, I knew I had to give this man jiggle physics. Lucky for me, I know how to make vtubers. Hello, my name is ottonevermore, or just Otto, and I'm a vtuber on Twitch as well as an artist and a vtuber creator. I'm also a big fan of Drawfee, so when I saw the opportunity to give one of their characters some gorgeous jiggle physics, I could not pass it up. Besides the jiggle physics, my main goal was to really make him look and move like loose, like how Karina draws him. So I started out by sketching out his physique. Mostly I was just trying to get his proportions right, just because I don't draw a lot of big buff men. You can see here that I draft him a couple different outfits. I based his main outfit off of the ones that Karina usually draws him in. I also give him his teal markings that Karina shows in some of her drawings, but I don't end up using all of the outfits or most of the markings. I do, however, add a couple more things at the end secretly that you will see later. Now I start making the lines, which can get pretty difficult for a VTuber because each body part has to have its own layer. Like the torso should be separate from each upper arm, which should be separate from each forearm, which should be separate from the hands, and so on and so forth. For this reason, layer organization with VTubers is incredibly important. I take a lot of pride in having very well organized and well-named layers. Even though I keep pretty well organized, it can definitely be overwhelming, especially in the face and the hair. They can have a lot of layers, and it can be confusing to figure out what all to put on what layers. But once I start coloring, everything really comes together because you can see how everything should overlap. But also, this is when I realized that he was looking a little bit scandalous. His peanuts is really just out there. I didn't intend it. It just kind of happened. That's just how he looks. He can't help it. As I get into the rendering, I started out wanting to do a more simple, like cell shading type of look, but I ended up doing a more full render, a tender render, if you will. You can see here that in addition to each facial feature having multiple layers, I also have the shading for the face on a few different layers, just so I can have a very fine control over it. And then I go in and I add his outfit because honestly, I forgot I'd even have to make it. I was too busy tenderly rendering his abs, I guess. Here you can see me try and render this gold cuff without a reference, and then eventually I delete my art, and I do it again with a reference. I also futz with this pendant for a bit because I couldn't decide how I wanted it to look. I started out trying to make it closer to the drawing of Karina's that I'm referencing, but that didn't look quite right with the rest of it, so I just futzed around and I decided on my own way of doing it. And then I organize all my layers, and that's the final art. But wait, there's more. Now we are in Live 2D, which is the program that you use to rig a VTuber model. The first thing that I do is I make sure all of my layers are properly clipped to each other, and that anything that should be in an additive blend mode or multiply blend mode is set correctly. And then I start giving them meshes, which is what makes them be able to move more than just your average art program, resize or rotate or skew. I give parts that will need a lot of movement more dense meshes, and any parts that won't be moving a lot, I give less dense meshes. And then I organize my parameters, which define the different types of movement of the different parts of the body. And then, finally, I can actually start rigging. The other very pink model that you can see popping up is a recent model that I made for someone I know. I'm just using it as a reference for like movement and organization and stuff. For loose, I start by rigging the head Z movement, and then I move on to all the different eye movements. I start out trying my best to work around this glowing eye thingy that I wanted to try out, where it would like reflect in the pupil when he's facing forward, but eventually I give up on that because it just doesn't really work out. It was too difficult. Here I'm getting into the eye physics, which is kind of difficult for this model because he doesn't have a lot of eye to physics. Usually with a VTuber model, it's like an anime girl with big fluttery lashes and a bunch of wobbly eye shines. But I drew his eyes pretty simply, so there's just not much to work with. And then I'm able to copy and paste and just flip the eye, and it'll work perfectly fine. And then I start working on the brow, which I can also copy paste. Oh, and I think this was me making sure the layers were in the right order. That's what this is. And then I start on the head XY movement, which it gets worse before it gets better, but I do promise it's gonna get better. It just looks a little janky for a bit. I start by warping the overall head shape, and then I select each individual feature, and I can adjust it to make it look more correct for the head turn. As you can see, I'm again only doing one side because I can also reflect these movements and have them flip over to the right. And then finally, I make him unbald, and I start adjusting his hair and horns. Looking back on these earlier parts of the rig is really weird, because I'm so used to now seeing the finished model that it looks so unfinished when I'm seeing it in progress. Like on these head turns, I made his head very skinny, which I definitely fixed later, but it's just jarring to see. And then I start rigging the Y angle, which turned out a little bit weirder than the X angle, but still not bad. The difficult thing about Live 2D is that when you rig an X angle and a Y angle, you generally still have to go back and adjust the corners of the parameters, like when two of them are active at the same time. They do have a way to calculate the corners, but it just doesn't look quite right, so I usually end up adjusting it for myself. It's a very, trust the process situation for me, but I did get a little embarrassed about the artistic process, so I ended up rigging them off camera. And then here I get into the hair physics to make it look all bouncy and flowy. Next up is the mouth rigging. Again, I was referencing the other model for this. Loose's mouth is pretty simple, just open and closed, and then different shapes for different vowels. I wanted to give him very serious and solemn mouth shapes. That's hard to say, mouth shapes. But eventually I do change his smiling mouth shape to be a little bit bigger so he can look a little happier. If I had thought ahead, I could have given him an expression where he makes an evil smile with a shadow over his eyes, because I think Karina has said before that he's kind of yandere, but I just didn't think to. Here I'm making sure the mouth looks right at different angles, adjusting a bunch of shit. You know how it goes. And here, I'm sorry, but I genuinely forgot to record rigging the torso X movement. I'm so sorry, but you can see me rigging his Y movement. I based it off of a model demonstration by YouTuber/vtuber Kurama. I never tried a lean forward and leaning back motion before, so I'm pretty happy with how this turned out actually. I think it looks really good in certain situations, but it does look a little bit weird, at least to me, when you're actually using the model, just because the demonstration in the program does look a little different from how you actually move when you're puppeting a VTuber, which is a shame, because, you know, it's how it's supposed to be used. And of course, I can't forget that his clothes need to be rigged too. This part is just a lot of little adjustments and futzing. And then I have to adjust the corners of the movement, just like with the head. This body movement was luckily a little easier to deal with though, so I did it on camera this time. Right here I got access to the ability to track my face directly in Live 2D instead of exporting to a separate program. So I was messing around with that for a little bit. I think you can see my own VTuber on screen at one point. And here's a lot of messing around with the physics, which it helps to make the movements really flowy and natural when you have a lot of physics going on. Then here I rig his legs and his hip movements so he can look extra saucy. Then you can see I referenced my own model to make sure I remember how to rig the torso Z movement. Here I add some fancy breathing to really emphasize his chest, and I gave him a little shoulder shrug when he leans back. And then I set everything up for physics, yay! I wanted everything that could have physics to have physics, so there would be a lot of motion and movement. So here I put physics on the bottom of his corset, a little on his pants, on his sleeves. And then I work on his pendant and his little arm chains, which end up looking so cool and shiny. In my opinion, his jewelry is kind of the most important part of this specific rig, because you're mostly going to be seeing him from the waist up, so it just adds a little more interest and flashiness to otherwise a pretty straightforward VTuber rig. It's so hard to see how the physics move when the preview's in fast motion, but trust me, you'll see them later. And then finally, I give this boy his jiggle physics. In this recording, I do the work to make his pecs and his arms move, but I did give him a little bit of Peanuts physics off camera. I didn't record it because I knew that it was going to look really, really wild until I dialed in the proper amount of physics. I just thought it might be better for YouTube if it didn't have to see that. And now we're coming to the end of the speed draw, so I do want to say I'm definitely not the first to make a Drawfee-inspired VTuber, so I'm going to link a couple other really cool VTubers and rigs down in the description, as well as a few live 2D tutorials and showcases that inspire my process and workflow. I also want to say I did do some more work off camera, but you will definitely see the results in the reveal.
if I want to take like a collage of elements of my face and paste them all together and make that my VTuber. So like it is
be kind
me.
of funny.
It's just a picture of me rigged up to face rig. The meta VTuber has arrived.